So there was a bit of a situation going on there. I think JDZ came to the rescue from memory.
Yeah, Craig was seen wildly waving his arms around with a live drill, whistling past everyone's noses.
It was a self-eliminating problem, though, because once the air in the tank ran out, then the problem would go away.
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. In this roundtable discussion, I sit down with some members of the Wet Mules. Craig Challen, John Dalla-Zuanna, Richard Harris, and Ken Smith share some exploration stories, their different roles, challenges of remote exploration, installing underwater habitats, how the group was formed, the infamous Green Book, and much more. Please enjoy. Okay, so I am very excited to introduce today the Wet Mules. If I could just actually have everybody introduce themselves. I guess we'll start with Craig, John, Harry, and then Ken.
Yeah, so I'm Craig Challen from Perth, Western Australia.
And tell him what your role is in the Wet Mules.
My official title is Executive Assistant to Professor Harris, but I was there at the beginting, as were we all, through some foolishness and as a bit of a joke, the Wet Mules started about 14 years ago or so, and for some reason everybody started taking it seriously except for us, so it's become a bit of a thing. I don't know how that happened.
Oh, and I'm John Dalla-Zuanna, and I'm in charge of logistics and politics, actually, or sort of keeping the peace between the Wet Mules and the rest of the world when we seem to be doing our thing versus what people think we should be doing their way. Anyway, so again, like Craig said, joined from the beginning and just part of the silliness that we get up to.
Richard Harris, aka Harry. Craig's partner Heather actually made us all business cards, and that's why we've all got a specific role. And I was delighted to find out that I was the Chief Executive Officer of the Wet Mules. Certainly an appointment I wouldn't have asked for and constantly try to get out of. But yeah, so another founding member. I can't remember how many founding members there were at the first idiotic meeting when the Constitution was drawn up and was registered as a unincorporated, uncoordinated, and completely disorganised shambles. But I think it was about 2000. Well, Craig, you set the organisation up, and we'll defer to Ken shortly to hear the story behind the name, which is crucial. But Craig, maybe tell us the story of how it happened.
We were marooned at the airport in Christchurch in New Zealand. So there's huge, big floods in Queensland, which would seem to be a bit disconnected, but that had a flow-on effect through all the flights, and we were trying to get back to Australia, and we ended up stuck in the airport for I don't know how long, but it was a long time, and so one thing led to another, and we made a group and built a website, and I don't know, all sorts of other silliness happened during that few hours, and there we are. Made a logo, I think.
Curious, did you build the website as you were waiting at the airport, or did that come after?
Yeah, no, that all happened right then. Yep. Had the domain registered while the domain was...
an afternoon's work.
Yeah.
An afternoon's work. This entire organisation was built.
That was probably its best afternoon. It's been all downhill since then.
Yes. Yeah, my name's Ken Smith, and I've been diving for many, many years. I'm not really in the class of these other guys. I'm sort of a backup diver. But I guess my two roles are doing engineering and technical stuff. My soldering iron's a very important part of any diving expedition. So I do technical stuff, and I was involved with radio location systems for a long time, a device called the Pinger, which got quite a bit of use around the world, actually, in mapping underwater caves. But my other role is court jester to Dr. Harris. And I've been telling jokes for years and years on our trips, actually, and it's only just in the last 6 months that I've realised that people were not laughing at my jokes, they were laughing at me. But anyway, at least I had a laugh, which is the main thing. So these trips have always been very good fun, and I think probably the Wet Mules, I could tell you the story of how they started, if appropriate now, actually, because we were marooned at Auckland Airport, and I'm pretty sure it was 2011. And with my work, I've often spent time in coal mines in the United States. And I was in a coal mine one day in the coal loadout where these guys were chewing tobacco and loading coal onto the train. And one of these blokes said to me, doing your job, you must make enough money to burn a wet mule. And everyone thought that was pretty funny. And then Craig said, oh, what a great name for a diving organisation. And of course, there and then he set up the website, and there were 6 of us then on that first trip. And of course, once we set up the Wet Mules, we had a real dilemma because everyone thought it was this very elite diving organisation, and everyone was getting a bit nervous that they hadn't been invited to join. And so we had this dilemma: do we invite everyone we know, or do we invite no one to join? Whatever we do, we're going to be in trouble. So in the end, I think we made it a fairly exclusive organisation. Although people who have particularly high diving standards, people who we think are above average, like Rick Stanton, for example, we made him a friend of the Wet Mule, and a few other people became friends as well. But since then, we have had a few more full members, which are the people who have done wonderful work on some of our trips. So the organisation has grown slightly. But it is a joke. It's not a serious diving organisation, contrary to popular belief.
So curious, how did you all meet in the first place?
Oh, through cave diving, I would say. JDZ is the kind of the elder statesman in many ways of our organisation. He's been a very long time cave instructor, and many of us have fallen under his tuition, and certainly that's how I got involved with exploration and kind of more complex cave diving. I think is having John and people like Ken and others as mentors in the sport. I'd been doing it for a while, but not very seriously until about the year 2000, and then revisited cave diving at that time and met up with some of these guys who were a bit older than me and had done vast amounts of cave diving all around the world, and they kind of tuned me into these possibilities of exploration and doing different stuff in the caves rather than just swimming around, which I'd been doing up until that point, taking some photos and videos. That was my main interest. But these guys showed me, the possibilities of things like mapping and exploration, of course, and some of the science that was of interest in the caves. So that's what got me really excited.
I think we were right into the start of the rebreather revolution too, in that early 2000 and so forth. So there weren't a lot of rebreather divers at that time, and there certainly weren't many rebreather divers that doing sub 40 metre dives, and consequently, as Harry said, we knew each other, and we sort of we knew each other both by name and also by reputation to a degree, and there was the occasional meeting at Oztech up in Sydney, and where obviously divers from all over the place congregate. And at the same time, we were sort of throwing ideas around. And then, having known each other, a great friend of ours, Paul Hosey, came up with a fantastic dive site that he needed to explore, which was far deeper than normal air diving, and he was pushing already depths in excess of 40 metres at that stage. And he looked for a team to get together that could do that type of work. And actually, Ken was part of the original trip with Paul, and some names got thrown around, and I think Ken or Harry had some better ideas of who was who at the time, and obviously Craig, being from Western Australia where Paul was based, sort of created this magnet of a few of us, or the people that were talking to each other in this room, ended up going to that very first trip, and that's before the Wet Mules was actually formed as a name.
Yes, it's worth mentioning that Paul Hosey was a very determined, or still is a very determined cave diver and explorer of caves. He's discovered caves all around Australia and pushed them very hard and made some amazing discoveries. And I met him in the early 2000s. At that point, I had the radio location device called the Pinger, and Paul was diving some secret caves on the Nullarbor Plain at that stage and realised that he needed some radio location done. So he invited me out on that trip, and we used the Pingers. And also, I suddenly realised that when I was diving with these guys, it was a whole higher level of diving than I'd been used to in the past. So I really had to brush up on my skills to keep up with these guys, actually. But it was through Paul Hosey that I met Harry and Craig, of course. And a year or two later, we went to this very wonderful cave in the north of Western Australia, which is now the second deepest cave in Australia, actually. It's the second deepest cave dive. Seems like yesterday, but it was 20 years ago now, of course.
2006.
2006, yeah. 2005 was my first year there, but I was out on the Roe Plains with Paul in 2004 looking at these new caves, which were top secret in those days, of course. One of them now is the longest underwater cave in Australia. This one particular cave that was dived in 2004 now has well over 12 kilometres of surveyed passage. So there's more underwater passage in that cave than any other cave in Australia.
So on that first trip where the name the Wet Mules came about, you said you were delayed at the airport. Did the trip ever go through, or was it just a wash?
No, we were on the way home.
We'd done the trip. We were on the way home and delayed. Yeah, but it actually was a bit of a fail, that trip in 2011. We didn't go too well. We spent most of the trip trying to set up habitats. Had some fairly wild ideas of how they might be installed and for moving them around in the cave. And that just sucked up most of the time, really. So, but we learnt a lot. And we went back the following year to that cave, the Pierce Resurgence, which has been the single most significant feature of the Wet Mules diving over the years, and a pretty career-defining site for most of us. And we built on that in the following years and done some pretty good stuff.
Yes, there were just 6 of us on that trip. I think it was my first trip, actually, that I was on. And that wasn't the one where you had all the habitat problem, because I do remember that some pushing of the cave actually happened on my first trip. So I think the problem with setting up habitats might have been at the previous trip that I wasn't on. But it was just 6 of us there for 8 or 9 days on site, so it was quite an exciting thing for me.
Yeah, there's been a lot of trips to that cave, so they get a bit mixed up. But it's all in the green book. I've got a green book that has every fact and every note of everyone's behaviour was documented, so there's nowhere to hide. If I need to get out the book, there'll be trouble.
Will that ever be published?
Well, it's a good question, actually. If I don't think anyone can read my handwriting, that might be the saving grace.
Actually, a book of the Pierce Resurgence would be a great project, wouldn't it?
It could be.
There's the green book, and it's like an old lady's recipe book now. It's got all these. Well, no, I can't show you that one. Sorry, that's. It's
that was the big
a lot of top secret information in that green book.
If you can imagine the evolution from creating a variable habitat that was able to go up in a diagonal sort of shaft, you can imagine the logistics that was involved in that. And I think that's when we sort of threw out some of the more outlandish ideas and went back to some pretty basic concepts.
Yeah, the mobile habitat used up a valuable 2 weeks of wasted time. So,
but anyway, we did learn, as we said. Yeah. We learned.
There's a funny video of rock drilling, actually, because these habitats are attached to the marble limestone with rock bolts that have to be drilled in with a compressed air drill. And I think there's a wonderful video somewhere of Craig drilling into the rock. But then he releases the trigger, and of course the drill kept on going because it had frozen on. So he had this roaring drill in his hand, and he tried to reach around to the tank to turn off the air, but his hand was frozen to the drill. So there was a bit of a situation going on there. I think JDZ came to the rescue from memory.
Yeah, Craig was seen wildly waving his arms around with a live drill, whistling past everyone's noses.
It was a self-eliminating problem, though, because once the air in the tank ran out, then the problem would go away. But the hand was getting a bit cold, turning into a big block of ice.
But you learn these things on the job, Nick, you see. You don't know that that's a thing until it happens to you. Or you watch your mate do it and go, well, I never would have been caught out by that obvious, situation.
Mind you, I was the one behind Craig, kicking very furiously, pushing him up against the rocks to give him enough pressure to get the drill bit into the rock as he's drilling. But anyway, that's what happens. So...
But all jokes aside, I mean, that is the way we've approached this cave, is to just incrementally learn and work out how to overcome these tiny practical problems. And that's really why it's taken the best part of 12 to 15 years to slowly and incrementally explore further and further down into this cave, which has a number of logistical issues. It's very remote. It requires helicopters to fly all the equipment in. We camp in there essentially without any contact with the outside world, certainly no reliable contact. And, we have to do everything for ourselves, and all the tools and gear have to be in there with us, because if you forget a spanner or an O-ring, then you're kind of screwed. And, put the water is 6 degrees Celsius, so, it's very cold for any kind of lengthy decompression, 4 to 5 hours in the water, even with good quality dry suits, undergarments and heated undergarments will, test us pretty well. And so when we're doing 8, 12 or even 16-hour dives in this place, we had to establish a series of habitats to get ourselves out of the water to be able to survive just the exposure and to do conservative decompression given the location and the difficulty with getting evacuated out of there. So it has been a very slow and careful process, but it's required a lot of on-the-job learning by all of us. And everyone that you're talking to here has kind of got their own different skills that they bring to this team, which makes it a really unique and exciting group to be with, because we've got, guys who are great mechanics, we've got engineers, we've got boffins and physicists, we've got medical and veterinary, and everyone brings something to the party to allow the guys who are doing the push dives, the bandwidth and the opportunity to do what we're doing.
It's just a comment on that. I've been on several trips, of course, and the first one I went on was when we first used the surface supply 12 volts for heating vests inside the habitats. But what strikes me is that there are no arguments. Everyone gets on with their work, and it seems to all just work really efficiently and well. I think we just all understand what we're all doing, and we all talk to each other and or instinctively know what needs to be done at any particular time. So there have been almost no conflicts. Sometimes conflicts can happen on cave diving expeditions. There have been some famous fallings out on the Nullarbor Plain, not amongst this group, but people who have a big argument out there and never patch it up. But we've always gone on pretty well, and it's generally been great entertainment, actually, and lots of fun.
So I think you're being pretty generous saying that it all runs pretty efficiently, Ken. It's my main aim is to stop it descending into a complete shambles, which it often threatens to do. But we haven't had
we got past the 7-year each, so,
Yes,
There's always problems and setbacks, but there was only one expedition where it completely fell apart and we didn't really achieve anything, I think.
Yeah, I think the key thing is not to be put out by when something goes wrong. If you can accept that something's gone wrong and reformulate a plan and carry on and do something else, that's the key, I think.
Oh, well, we all have a good time. Nobody gets killed in the making of this movie. Everything always turns out okay in the end, so
it does.
We have fun.
Yes.
We just seem to keep going back for one last look.
Yes, well, that's the big question, of course.
After threatening never to go back again until we get home, and then the plan starts for the next 12 months.
Oh, yeah, well, when you get out of the water, after 16 or 17 hours in that water, you get out and you think, I'm never going back in that place again. Usually takes about 48 hours or so. Then you forget all the bad bits and just remember the thrill of discovery.
Yeah, next time we're going to do this, and next time we're going to do that. And we work on that, and we bring it along for the next trip, and that works, and the increment happens, and you come to the next obstacle, and then you sort of say, okay, back to the drawing board, and away we go. Come back again 12 months later.
It is a very beautiful place, though, the Pierce Resurgence. It's a piece of natural scenery. It's stunningly beautiful, and particularly on the last trip, actually. It was a fairly warm day, so we had warm, humid air, but the water, as Harry said, is quite cold, 6 degrees C, so this warm, humid air was moving across the cold water as it came out of the Resurgence, and so there was a permanent cloud of mist, ethereal mist, around all our activities, which was pretty beautiful, actually. The film crew loved that, actually. The scenery was fantastic for filming.
So with the Pierce Resurgence being so remote, how was it discovered, and whose idea kind of was it to go and explore it?
It goes back a long way, actually. There are many people who've been there long before the Wet Mules went there, and some quite heroic things were done in the early days. I guess it was discovered as a resurgence a long time ago by people walking, trampers up in the mountains. But the first dives were pretty shallow, done with open circuit and wetsuits. Very courageous people diving with wetsuits. And I guess that the first dive was it in the 60s? I can't remember.
1975, I think, by a guy called Keith Deckers, who was spending a lot of time in New Zealand. I think he's Australian born. And he did some pioneering dives in there in the first section, which is a tunnel that sort of curves around a little bit and ends up at about 18 metres, and he didn't quite get down to 18 metres on his initial forays into the cave. But there's a fantastic archival film of him dragging a camera with some big surface-supplied lights down into this cave. It's a horrible sort of greeny colour out of focus, but it just shows this first section of the cave, which, as Ken mentioned, in a wetsuit in 6 degrees was a bit of an epic outing. And he didn't quite reach this 18-metre point, because if he had, he would have seen that it drops off into this abyssal shaft which goes all the way down to about 105 metres before it starts to flatten out a little bit. Yeah, but he was certainly the first guy. And then the next sort of significant dives were in the 90s, I think. A local caver, Kieran Mackay, who's an extraordinarily talented and tough dry caver who does a fair bit of cave diving as well. He started going there, and he had a slightly ill-fated expedition in about 1995 when one of their party actually died. They were going a bit too deep on air, and one of them succumbed probably to narcosis and CO2 accumulation. So that was a bit of a setback, and nothing much was done until one of our mates, who's now one of the Wet Mules, a guy called Dave Appley, who's a very similar disposition in a way to Kieran. He's a very, very tough and capable long-time caver and diver in all disciplines, and he did a trip over there and actually recovered the body of this guy from about 85 metres, and then set about doing exploration himself. And it was that guy, Dave, who introduced me to the cave in 2007, and then I kind of dragged these guys along after me.
So I actually met Keith Deckers quite recently, actually, a few months ago. I've never met him before, and it was bloody good to meet one of the legends. Some of the stories he's telling about those early dives, they were pretty hardcore, those guys. But he did do some dives in the shaft, and he said they were diving down to about 50 metres on air in there.
Okay.
On subsequent dives. So they saw a bit, but yeah, they're a bit scared to keep going deeper. This vertical shaft goes pretty much straight down to about 105 metres. It's pretty intimidating. I can remember the first time I went there, and I thought I'd been around a bit and done a few dives, and I got in that place and I thought, what am I doing here? This is just so big and dark. I mean, it's this black marble, so it just sucks up all the light that you've got available. It just disappears into the walls. And it's cold, and it's the most intimidating place I've ever been, I reckon. Maybe I wouldn't be too bothered about it now, but at that time, it was. It really got on top of me a bit, and it took that whole first trip just to get my head around diving in there. But obviously went back for another go, and it got a little bit easier from there. It's still not a place to take lightly, though.
It was strange that it took me, maybe if not the second trip, definitely by the third trip, to understand that I was going down the shaft okay, and you can visibly and physically feel yourself descending. But it wasn't until, as I said, 2 or 3 trips later that I realised that the shaft actually does a rotation. And you sort of come out of a ledge and there's a shaft in front of you, and you just go dropping straight down and down to where it flattens out and all that, and then you proceed, and then for some unknown reason it obviously went in a direction that was a bit foreign, and I couldn't understand what was going on, and eventually it clicked that I was actually doing a 180 degree rotation, and what you looks like you're going forward is in fact that you're going forward and turning and going back in the direction you came from, if that makes sense. So it was really, it was quite, when it hit you, and I sort of said, wow, how did I miss that? Or how come I failed to see that so early on? But it was it's an intimidating place originally, but familiarity does breed a bit more confidence in what you're doing with it, and then it becomes a bit more familiar.
Yeah, I think we all had that same experience with our first trip there. It takes a while to get your head around the place, but yeah, it's an amazing cave, and exploration opportunities absolutely still ongoing. We have no idea how deep it goes. we know where the water comes from about a kilometre away as the crow flies, but the cave still goes in almost the opposite direction underground. So there's still a great deal of work there to do to make the connection through to the dry cave where we know the water originates. And it's another lifetime of work. And I think, to be honest, outside of the realms of the current technology and abilities, because the idea of ascending into another cave with the amount of decompression we'd be incurring is currently impossible unless we can find a way down into the system from the other side first, so that we know we can actually transit through to that other side. And we haven't managed to find that connection despite a fair few attempts by different members of our team.
The cave was interesting biologically too. I remember the first trip I was on, we had some funding for collecting fauna. That was one of my jobs, actually, to go into the cave and look for anything moving around on the rock surfaces and trying to sample them, and also putting in traps here and there, sampling sediments and so on, which we would later strain and look for life forms. And I think we did actually find a few new species there, didn't we? There was a flatworm, I believe, which was a new species, and also a little crustacean.
A little amphipod and a gastropod, a little snail. Very interesting.
Yeah. So caves are interesting biologically as well, actually. If you take a microscope into the cave and look for these tiny creatures living on the rock surfaces.
Anyway, we're probably boring everyone with talking about the Pierce, as we've got other strings to our bow, no question. Ask John about his salami, for example.
I'm curious.
Time old tradition. Being of an Italian background, I do the annual salami making with the family and kids, and they do end up at the various trips that we do, wherever I can get through the biohazards of salami in the true sense of the word. So there's no faux pas there. But what else can we talk?
And very nice salami it is too, I must say.
Yeah, we do a couple of good mixes there.
John's a very capable chef, and so that was one of his early contributions to the team was that he was the main man in the kitchen.
Yes.
So as I say, everyone's got their skills, which is important in a team that's spending a bit of time away from the main drag.
Yes. Actually, the eating and drinking stands out as being a highlight of most of our trips, actually.
I would say.
That's wonderful. We've not shown the picture of the pallet of beer going into the Pierce, but we tend to eat and drink pretty well, which I think is important for working hard in the bush.
You were saying that's just a group that you guys don't really take too serious, but other people looking from the outside in look at it as a really serious group. Do you have people approach you trying to join the group or wanting to be a part of it? Like, oh, how can I be a part of this? Or how does one become a member? Is it just kind of a invite only thing, or is it just completely friends that come and hang around?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know if people actually outside of this group take it seriously. I think, whenever you set up a little clique like this, it's always dangerous, right? You upset some of your mates and they go, why wasn't I asked, kind of thing. But it was just a spontaneous, stupid thing that happened in an airport with the bunch of people who happened to be there at the time. And then we tried to be all-inclusive by making anyone who was already a mate of ours a sort of friend of the Wet Mules. And then as time went on, and we had a few more guys coming on regular trips with us, particularly to New Zealand. If they did a couple of trips in a row, then we'd just invite them to join. So I guess coming to the Pierce Resurgence itself became an essential part of the membership application. And, the initiation ceremonies became more and more bizarre, and the coronation ceremony in the pub back in Nelson, one of the local towns, became more and more extravagant. We were inspired by the recent coronation in the UK, I think, for our last one. So, they've become quite major events. But no, I don't think anyone who has any kind of self-respect would actually ask to join a group like this. It would be reckless at best. But for all the jokes, we actually, I believe, extraordinarily careful and considered with some of the stuff that we do. We talk a lot of nonsense, but we have very robust discussions about the safest way to approach, particularly the deep diving. And I guess that's the thing that brought Craig and I together in this trip in Western Australia in the Kimberleys, Kidja, the deep cave that we mentioned before, that's when Craig and I actually went diving together for the first time, and we kind of recognised that we both had this interest in deep diving almost for the sake of it, because of the interesting physiology and different hazards that exist in that kind of diving, and both having science/physiology backgrounds, it kind of all made sense, maybe, what we were doing. And there's not a large number of people out there who are particularly interested in deep diving, so it meant that some of the sites were available for exploration still. And once we found this place in New Zealand that was deep and still going, then that became a bit of an obsession almost for the two of us. Not that any of the other guys aren't equally as capable, if not almost certainly better divers than us, but we've just got this particular lust for the finding out what's down at the bottom, I suppose. And the team has been amazing in helping us find those goals or achieve those goals.
Yes, there's a history of diving in the Pierce. I'm just thinking of the South Australians who went there. Chris Brown, for example, went there in the early days, and we're still using his shot line, actually. He put in a very good line all the way down the first big, deep shaft, and which we still use to this day. Dave Doolett, who was living in South Australia at the time, and Tim Payne. I think Tim Payne went there on one occasion, didn't he?
Definitely Chris and David.
Certainly, I think maybe just Chris and Dave Doolett. So we stand on the shoulder of giants, I guess, in many respects. So it's a incremental, step-by-step process.
So take me through, you're about to plan a trip or there's a new exploration on the drawing board. Take me through kind of how you would go about doing that.
Yeah, well, they're all different, obviously, the situation and how we came to them. So we don't really do very much primary exploration. We're not, I've got a lot of admiration for these guys, and there's quite a few of them that will just spend weeks in the bush and be sticking their head into every little hole that they can find. And, they've probably got a strike rate of about 1 in 200 or something. But that's what you got to do to find the sites and go caving in them and go cave diving if you hit water, which is mostly what we want to do. The dry cavers roll their eyes, of course, when they hear that, and the last thing they want to see is water. But we're a little bit different, and so most of the sites that we get into will have been explored by other people first, and for whatever reason they've they either invite us or they've discontinued their exploration because it's the dives have got a bit big for them, or we just sort of sniff them out and muscle in on them, whatever. But
lack the support,
because of that. Generally, we'll know something about the cave beforehand, and there'll be a single objective. We have done it where we go to just a caving area and see what we can find, but generally we'll have 1 or maybe 2 targets in our minds that we're going to do. We know what sort of dive it is. The real critical things obviously are depth and distance and temperature of the water. And once you know those things, then I suppose the logistics of getting there as well. So we're pretty used to going to very remote sites, because most of us cut our teeth out in the desert on the Nullarbor Plain in Australia, which, although it's been well visited, it's a long way from everywhere. There's no corner shop, and so you've got to operate in an expedition environment where you take everything with you, and you've got to be completely self-sufficient for the period of time that you're on site, including being able to self-rescue if anything goes wrong. I'm very pleased to say that I'll point out for the listeners that we've never had an accident of any significance on any of our trips. Nobody's had much more than a grazed knee or a cut thumb as far as injuries go. So once we've gathered that information about a site, we will just sort of start at the beginning and draw on our previous experiences, get on site, have the gear that we think is going to be appropriate for that dive, and get into it and see how it goes. And most of the significant sites for us will involve multiple trips as well. So quite often, in fact, probably more often than not, the first trip will just be a bit of a recce where we're going to suss it out, see how easy it is, see what skills we need. And everything we do really is in a team environment. There's not too many 1 or 2 man trips that we have. So requires a bit of coordination, finding some suckers that you can rope into your little pet project and see how it goes. And because of that, so it's more of an incremental approach rather than a crash through or crash approach, and on most of the trips we've done as well. But it's all gone pretty well.
Yes, I don't think we're a unique group particularly. Yeah, there's other groups of friends who've done very good work over the years that have named themselves. I'm thinking about the Limestone Cowboys, which was a very early team of people who were doing exploration, I think mainly in New South Wales. And in Mount Gambier, we've got a group called the Soggy Wombats, which is a team of people who've done some very good exploration work in Mount Gambier recently by working very, very hard and looking at very difficult caves. And there's the Cast Monkeys, which is another group which have their own specialised work. So I don't think we really feel that we're in any way special. And there are plenty of other really talented people in other groups doing other different types of exploration. So it's
and there's even proper cave divers out there around the world, like the Cast Underwater Research Group. Guys who actually know what they're doing. Very impressive. You could take people like that quite seriously if you wanted to. But we've chosen not to go down that path.
I'm really loving all the names.
They brought some interesting technology with them, and that we've tried to better them or whatever, like that little habitats that they have when we sort of talk or make recordings about our dive whilst we're in the actual habitat. But they've taken it one level further, where they've actually got Wi-Fi connectivity, which they can then talk to the outside world, and we just don't have enough sky space above us to hold the satellite long enough to get a message to the rest of the world. But we keep our eye on what happens around the place with different people, but and obviously they do the likewise with us.
Yes, I think one point is that the hard work does pay off. The people who discover stuff don't find it easily. They work very, very hard, and you have to admire people who not only spend hours and hours and hours doing research and go caving in very difficult and trying conditions, and then have the courage to go on when many people would turn back. So it's that very courageous group of people who actually tend to open up caves that the rest of us have the pleasure of diving in later on. So you have to admire those people.
I could just only imagine, there's probably many, many moments that stand out in your minds. Is there, for each of you, is there one of the funniest moments, funniest trips? I'm sure there's very accomplishing trips. What would you rate up there as being one of your most memorable moments?
They're all funny. If Ken's there, they're all very funny, because he is, he's such a serious chap in many ways. And then you'll be having a conversation with Ken, and suddenly you'll realise that you're in the middle of a joke, and you didn't quite recognise that what he was saying was developing into a joke. But with years of experience, I now can see the early signs, the early warning signs, and you recognise that this might actually not be a true story. It could end up in a punchline somewhere. So, but no, Ken has one particular joke which I can't discuss on air because it's a little bit cheeky, but it is in fact the funniest joke in the world. And the only joke that was funnier is apparently the one that the Germans had, which they could only teach each soldier one part of the joke, because if they strung more than 2 or 3 words together, it was immediately fatal to the whole regiment. So they anyway, you have to look up Monty Python if you want to hear more about that one. But in terms of actual trips, I'm happy to start by talking about, just briefly, a trip we did to a volcanic crater up in Queensland called Hypipamie Crater, which we were lured to by, there was a map right next to the crater which showed, a classic sinkhole shape with a sock, toe going down off the bottom and a big question mark and a ... at about 80 metres depth. And so that was like a red rag to a wet mule bull. And we're up there like a rat up an aqueduct, and we had to get authority from the museum and under the pretenses of looking for some little animals and microbes in the cave, which was interesting to do. But the exciting part about that was that I took responsibility for designing a high line down into this crater, because it was about 60 metres sheer cliff down to the water. So quite a formidable drop. And so we'd been doing a bit of rope work, and we were getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, thinking how capable we were. So we designed this high line across the water down to the bottom, tied off at a tree at the top and a tree at the bottom. And I sent the plan to a guy called Al Warreld, who is a legendary dry caver in Australia, who wrote a book called Vertical, all about ropes and prussics and pulleys and all the physics involved. Anyway, so he gave the seal of approval to our design. And so Craig and I abseiled down into the sinkhole, swam the rope across, and then tied it off to the tree down the bottom. And then it was my job to get hauled up the rope all the way to the top by a very strong group of men. And as I was sort of swinging halfway up this rope, halfway up this bloody sinkhole, it occurred to me that, all my trust now was being tested in my design of this rope system. And I was never so happy to get to the top and grab a hold of the cliff. But we ferried divers and people up and down this rope system for a week and explored this sinkhole underneath a very heavy layer of duckweed. So it was really gloomy and eerie down in the water. And I think we found the solid bottom at about 75 or 80 metres, and no sign of any passage continuing. So all these bottomless holes that you're enticed to are always not very deep at all, in my experience. And but it was a hell of an exciting adventure and just a great experience.
Yes, I think the story about bottomless holes is very interesting, actually. I think Craig, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but he dived the shallowest bottomless cave in Western Australia, which turned out to be 2 metres deep, I think, actually. Although I think Harry are a bit ahead of him, actually, because we went to the Flinders Ranges here in South Australia once many years ago, because there were some water-filled mine shafts on a property up there, and we got all the mines department information and showed the shafts going down to about 300 feet. So we went up there with Trimix and all sorts of stuff to dive these deep caves. But when we got there, we thought, we'll just lower our weight in first into each of these holes just to see how deep it is. And of course, we lowered the weight in, and I think one was 1.5 metres deep, and the other one was 0.5 metre or something, because they were mine shafts, they were mine entrances. But when people finish with a mine, they throw all the rubbish down the hole and essentially block it off. So they may be workings deeper, but they're all blocked off by tons and tons of rock and debris that have been thrown into the hole. So, but it was a nice trip. We did some nice bushwalking and four-wheel driving, but sadly no diving.
What's your deepest bottomless hole, John?
Polly McQueen's, but that's another type of exactly the same sort of story of the secret location that is bottomless, and we get to the place, and we initially did the same thing, tied a weight to the end of a rope and sort of twirled it and threw it in, and plop, and it didn't go deep. It must have missed a hole, and pull it up, and did that all around the perimeter. And then we said, this isn't finding anything, so we dragged a line right across the lake and then segmented it metre by metre by metre, and I think we ended up with one canoe paddle and a couple of bits and pieces for a total depth of about 1.5 metres. It's usual story. But I think whilst it wasn't funny at the time, we do take a lot of videos and bits and pieces on all our dives, of course, and it was shown to me at a party after the fact. Someone had done a bloopers video on the commencement of a dive that I was about to do, and I'm at the water's edge, waist high, fully loaded up with equipment, and as I turn on each piece of equipment, there was an equipment failure. Like I'd turn it on and the hose would blow, I'd turn it on and there's a leak, and I'd sort of do piece by piece by piece, and if there wasn't about 7 or 8 failures of equipment for some, like completely, no reason, but everything I did at the start of that dive, I had to take the gear off and reassemble it, and there was another problem. And that was done and presented to me as a blooper tape at a party, and it was the most hilarious thing that I could. Anyway, it was frustrating at the time, but I didn't realise it would be so funny to somebody else watching the whole thing.
We all thought it was funny right at the time.
There would have been about 5 or 6 failures. Just completely, yeah. It was something was telling me not to do the dive at that moment, but we eliminated every single one of them. Anyway, that's what happens.
One of the funny ones that sticks in my mind is just one thing after another this trip. We went up to Christmas Island on a caving expedition, which is a volcanic island out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And the caving, unfortunately, turned out to be a little bit disappointing. And so we transferred our attentions to diving in the ocean. And there's these huge, big wall dives. And, of course, we had brand new side mount rebreathers that we'd only got about a week before, so we were up for some big wall dives in those. So we went down to the most remote part of the island, and they'd lent us a couple of the park rangers from the national park that are there. So we chucked the boat in, and they dropped us in at the dive site, and we went off and did this big drift dive. And unbeknownst to us, the guys in the boat decided to just go fishing while we were diving and weren't really paying much attention to us at all. And so we popped our heads up a couple of hours later and...
To be fair, we were on rebreathers, so they weren't really following bubbles. Go on.
Yeah, they could have looked out for the lift bags, though, when the DK started. But we popped our heads up, and the island's disappearing over the horizon. We look around, there's no boat. And we're heading south, and the next stop from there is Antarctica, about 4,000 nautical miles away. And so that was a little bit of a moment. Eventually, they found us after a couple of hours, just when we were, I wouldn't say we were ever getting close to despair, but it was starting to become a point of some concern. But we hopped on the boat and went off to another dive site a little bit closer into shore. Did another dive there, and I came up and sitting on the boat and had a little bit of a floppy arm and a little bit of a bend. And so everybody starts freaking out. I wasn't too bothered about it, but Harry goes crazy because he's just, I think one of the main drivers in his life is just for an opportunity to embarrass me by subjecting me to medical attention. And so we head off back to shore, and we're in the boat, and they pull the boat up onto the trailer and tell me to sit right where I am, and then drive with me in the boat off to the local hospital, pull into the emergency department with me still in the boat, which I reckon is something that's never happened before. Bundled me off, stuck me in a bed. I'm feeling fine by this time, but nobody listens to me, of course. And so just try and subject me to one humiliation after another of intravenous fluids and oxygen, a whole load of unnecessary stuff. It was absolutely okay, nothing to worry about, but it was pretty funny turning up to hospital in the boat. But I got mine back on Harry because we did another dive a couple of days later, just in the shallows over the reef, and we both saw something shiny and we both reached for it at the same time, and I was just a fraction of a second in front of him, and I picked up a new watch that somebody had lost over the side of the boat. And it was still going, and it was still telling the correct time, and I have that watch to this day. So that was a winner.
Do you wear the watch from time to time, or is it just kind of kept up on the shelf?
It's sort of dropped off the agenda. I was wearing it for quite a few years, but I've sort of moved up in the technology stakes a little bit now. But it's still got it. Probably needs a new battery by now.
You mainly wore it when you thought you were catching up with me, I suppose. I love that watch. I really wanted it.
You will never own that watch.
I've got a birthday coming up.
I think there's a bit of friendly competition between our lead divers, actually, Harry and Craig. We see this friendly competition popping up from time to time, and it's fun to watch, actually.
Well, someone said at the start that we don't really argue, but you've never seen Craig and I underwater. We can argue underwater.
Under the cone of silence, yes. Taking habitat to a new level.
No, there's been a lot of great trips.
The habitats are designed with seats in them, or sort of seats in them. And there's always the big seat and the smaller seat. Like, I remember that was the first year, I think, when it's very hard to get two big seats into a small habitat. And originally, we were doing solo dives, and until we got much deeper. So yeah, it was easy to sit in the big seat and put your feet up on the smaller end. But then when the two decided to do the dive together, then someone had to sit on the small seat and someone had to sit on the big seat. So yeah, that would have been fun watching.
That's why I always check Craig's gradient factors and make sure that I'm just going to reach that stop just a couple of minutes ahead of him. Because once you're sitting, well, you can't move.
Yes, the solo diving was quite funny, actually, because when you do the solo dives, there's one person stuck in the habitat for hours and hours by himself, while the rest of the team are on the surface. And, of course, we do take some food down to the person in the habitat, but they're often there until midnight or later. But we can chat to them on the communication system, and they say, oh, I'm just eating this soggy coal sandwich down here in the habitat, and then we'll say, oh, well, we've just opened another bottle of very nice Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, and we're just having some rather nice cheese prior to having our main meal, which is this, And, of course, the person in the habitat feels pretty unhappy, but 2 days later he's on the surface and the other bloke's down there, and a bit of payback happens then.
So I'm just curious, because I've actually never really looked into it. When you are going to install a habitat, what all goes into installing a habitat? Because I've seen there's different structures of habitats under the water. Is it something that you're putting together in the water, or I guess I don't know. So how do you go about doing something like that?
We've had a few different techniques over the years, but our two main ones are what we call an intermediate bulk container, which is a 1,000 litre industrial liquid container that we cut the roof out of and turn it upside down. And so that's got a structure, rigid structure, and then we can just anchor it. Just about all of the habitats we've put in are anchored from below. We'll put bolts in the cave wall or use natural anchors and sort of suspend them upside down for want of a better description. So when we first started, that was a pretty tortuous process, really. It was difficult, but we've got better at it over the years. Just getting them level, making sure your anchors are going to be okay, getting the ropes all the right length. But the ones that we favour now are just basically an inflatable bag that you can put it all in place. It's easy to carry in. You just fold it up and carry it in under your arm, unfurl it once you're in position. So you can get it through restrictions with the IBCs. When we use them, you've got to have a fair size passage to get it into where you want it to be. And these bags, once we get in there, they're more comfortable, easier to install other little features and home appliances and stuff in, and a bit bigger as well. So when you've got two people in there, there's plenty of room for the two people, and you can even get a visitor in there from time to time if you need to. So it's just a thing that, I don't think there's any shortcuts for anybody that wants to install habitats. You've just got to try doing it, get the experience, and see what works. There's no secrets about what we do. We're happy to share all of that sort of stuff. But every cave's a little bit different as far as how you're going to anchor them as well. Sometimes you have to put them up on the roof. We haven't got as much experience with that, but particularly in Europe, that seems to be the favoured technique. Just sort of suck it and see. You got to be, a little bit practical about these things, so a bit of engineering experience does not go astray when you're trying to do it. But
have you ever had one break loose?
I don't think so. Only we've had one come. I'd say the anchor ropes came undone, but it transpires that they were never actually done up in the first place. So of course, when air was applied to the habitat, it broke free and wanted to head back to the surface. But that was no drama. Just got to empty it, bring it back down again. I think that's the only time we've had one go wild.
We've never had a big problem with the habitat itself when we've been in it, which of course would be pretty disastrous if it suddenly and catastrophically deflated or broke loose. It would be a difficult situation. But we've had problems with the micro rebreathers inside the habitats or some of the communications and things. So, if you get there and find that your rebreather that you're planning to use, these little chest mount rebreathers of various shapes and sizes that we've built or bought over the years, occasionally you'll find one of those is flooded when you arrive there, and that makes for a pretty it makes the whole decompression just hard work. You're fighting to find gas to breathe and getting people to bring tanks down to you and those sorts of things, but kind of passes the time. But I wouldn't say we've ever had anything really life-threatening go wrong in those habitats. The thing I would caution people about is that I think we all believe the most dangerous time in the habitat is the transition in and out of the habitat. If you become disconnected from your breathing gas at any point, especially if you're hanging over a very deep shaft, then obviously things can go astray very, very quickly indeed. So we always have a support diver there when someone's going into a habitat. Only one person at a time is taking any equipment off to go up into the habitat. We always have our back mount rebreathers clipped onto the habitat before we start to take them off so they can't drop down behind us. And some of these things we've learnt from fairly painful experience over the years as well. So that's the really dangerous time, is those transitions in or out, and moving up to another habitat or leaving the last habitat to exit the cave. So that needs to be really well rehearsed.
I think the habitats in recent trips have had enriched oxygen atmospheres, haven't they? I know early on the decompression would be done almost entirely breathing from a mouthpiece of one sort or another for 12 hours, so you get sore lips doing that. But I think the recent habitats have been filled with an enriched oxygen atmosphere, so the atmosphere in the habitat was actually breathable, which made life much easier. It also meant talking was much easier as well, so the guys in the habitat could chat away comfortably and make videos rather than having a mouthpiece stuck in their mouth all the time.
That's with the introduction of the Mule-O-Matic 2000s, of course, with the sort of the scrubber, the sort of fan force scrubber devices, which are just hung into the habitats, and was able to obviously recycle the air a lot more efficiently than having to suck out of a mouthpiece for hours, as Ken just said.
Yeah, to remove the CO2, obviously.
Yep.
So what's next for the Wet Mules?
Well, it's a very good question. It's probably fair to say it's my fault that I'm not that keen to go back to the Pierce Resurgence after all these trips. We've reached not the depth that I would have liked to have gone to, but probably sort of come to the end of my personal quest in that cave. So whether the other guys go back there again, time will tell. But looking around to other sites, and Craig mentioned China, I think, at the start, which was something we were hoping to go to in January, to a cave there that I've dived, or that we've dived a couple of times before. But unfortunately, our permits to dive the cave were cancelled at the very last minute. And so Craig and another guy are heading back shortly. Unfortunately, I wasn't available, had to do a bit of work in the meantime to pay the rent. So, but then we've got another trip to Bushman's Hole in South Africa, a very famous deep cave that a lot of people will have heard of, and very excited to be going there to do some deep diving there as well and try somewhere different. So there's plenty of sites around the world. It just requires a bit of travel and relying on other people overseas to organise logistics and things, which is always a bit of a worry when you're used to doing it yourself. But they're all very experienced. Very experienced people we're going to be working with. So hopefully everything will go well.
It'd be a good opportunity to also acknowledge Oz Patterson, for example, who in New Zealand has supported us every year with hospitality and support and logistics and so forth. So it's not just us doing all the work. There is a mountain of people out there that believe in what we do, and obviously they feed off us as much as we feed off them, basically. But there are a lot of interested people out there, and they do offer support, and we're very thankful of that at the very least. So we acknowledge that.
Yes, it's a real team effort, isn't it? Everyone really chips in and does their best to help. That's been one of the great pleasures, actually, the amount of support and friendship that has been shown to us over the years in various expeditions.
Do you have big goals for China, Craig?
Well, you'll have to wait and see, Nick. I'm not real big on, unlike some people, mouthing off about what I'm going to do. I'd rather talk about it afterwards. So, that's just a way of looking like a bit of an idiot saying all this stuff that you're going to do, because if it doesn't work out, then you look a bit silly. So we'll see. But, certainly in Dajing, the main target there, which we were there before. Harry's been a couple of times, but I was there once in 2015. It's going pretty deep. and there's a lot of interest from the Chinese. We're being looked after very well by our friend over there, and so got high hopes. But stay tuned. We'll let you know.
Awesome. So I usually like to end the episode on some piece of advice. So any piece of advice that you would like to give to somebody starting a group or an expedition that they're about to go do, or just a life piece of advice?
Well, look, I'll start off. I don't know if this is so much advice or a lesson or what, but we were really lucky that we all started out doing this sort of stuff. Sadly, a few decades ago. There's a lot of water flowing under the bridge since we all did our first dives. And we have, we were there during this technical diving revolution in the 90s and maybe into the early 2000s, where it was so exciting and so new, and things were coming along every week. It seemed that there'd be new equipment or new techniques or some pretty amazing new dives that had been done. And I'm a bit dismayed to see that excitement and that momentum has gone out of technical diving a little. So I'd just say, be encouraging of people that are starting out on this path now. You don't have to just be on this treadmill of doing courses and being sucked into this training agency system and paying to go on dive trips and stuff like that. There is so much opportunity out there. There is a stack of caves. There's heaps of shipwrecks still out there. And if people are interested, just, have some independence, find some like-minded people. There's nothing special about us. We're just ordinary human beings, but we're a group of friends that like getting out there and getting amongst it. And there's so much opportunity. So people should just be enthusiastic. You can do this stuff. The people that have done... I can remember starting out and I met some people that were diving what were really deep dives then, deeper than 100 metres. And I thought, I'll never do that sort of stuff. That's way beyond me. And nowadays, times have changed, and we'd do a 100-metre dive, any day before breakfast time, really. But it's all doable. And what I often quote, which someone when I was starting out told me, is that the dirty little secret of adventuring is that 90% of it is turning up. So just get into it and turn up, and the rest inevitably follows.
Hard to beat that bit of advice. I would just add to it and say, find mentors, find experienced people who are doing what you think you'd like to do, and kind of tag along, be a bit annoying. That's what I was like. And I'm sure JDZ and
you're still annoying,
Ken yeah, but I'm still an enthusiast, Craig, and that's what you got to be. You just got to show some enthusiasm and follow these people around. Find people that think the same way you do, and just learn from people with the runs on the board. Don't believe all the hype from the diving gods who tell you how great they are. Just tag along with the people who are out there doing stuff, and you'll end up doing the same stuff if that's what you want.
Just turn up. Just be there, knock on the door, and be prepared to do whatever it takes to sort of be on site, and whether it's just and obviously support diving. You learn the ropes that way very quickly. Just see what people do and see if it works for you, and so forth. So and through repetition gain your experience, and don't try to go to the end in the first go, because that's where people get unstuck. But I totally agree with Craig. 90% of it's just being there, and the rest you make up as you get there.
I'm just thinking about something that Chris Brown said once, actually. Chris Brown's a famous South Australian or Australian cave diver, and he used to instruct and take people on guided dives into a place called Shaft at Mount Gambier. And on one occasion, I got him on video doing this, actually. Everyone's standing around and he's doing the pre-dive briefing, and when he finishes, he says, "Right, now, what's the first rule of cave diving?" And everyone stood around silently, and Then eventually he told them what the answer was. The first rule of cave diving is to have fun, and you shouldn't ever lose sight of that.
Quite right, Ken.
On a serious note.
Well, I really, really appreciate everybody taking the time today to join the podcast. This has been absolutely wonderful. I hope you guys had a great time. I look forward to hearing about more of your adventures, and maybe we could do a recap in a year's time or something to kind of see what the group has been up to, because it's been really great, and I think it's going to be good stuff for people to listen to. So thank you very much for joining the podcast today.
All right. Well, it's great being here. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Nick. Good luck with the edit on this one. Got a lot of dribble.
Yes. And we never got to talk about our cooking program, did we?
Should be able to cut that down. Yeah, don't forget, we do have videos online, diving the menu, really important ones, and things of that nature.
We do a cooking program on many of our trips, actually, because everyone does a cooking program, and we thought a cooking program associated with cave diving would be just what the public would demand, actually, and they've been hugely successful.
It's proven to be very popular.
You too can learn how to divide a cone ice cream into 3 equal portions.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Offgassing, a scuba podcast.